So I've said this before, but I'm going to say it again. This is my favorite time for college football. Early signing day is right around the corner. The college football playoffs are rapidly approaching. Bowl games are staring us in the face, and the transfer portal is alive and well, and it all culminates to me into such an exciting time of year. And today, we're going to focus in on a recruiting battle for a top prospect in all of high school football, the number one tackle, in my opinion, Kadyn Proctor. Because Proctor is currently committed to Iowa, but several institutions, such as Coach Prime in Colorado, the Oregon Ducks, and the Alabama Crimson Tide are doing everything they can to try and get the flip. Today, we're going to go through this. We're going to talk about each team's likelihood of flipping the five-star offensive tackle and break everything down. Before we can, as always, y'all know the drill. I need to hear from you. Hop down to the comments, give me a Y for yes or an N for no. Do you believe Kadyn Proctor will flip? And then let me know where you think he ends up. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. Hit that bell notification as I do constant college football content. You don't want to miss any of it. And if you enjoyed this content, be sure to like and comment down below. Those interactions may seem small, but they truly are massive to content creators such as myself, in both getting picked up and maintained by the YouTube algorithm. But having said all that, let's jump right into this. And make no mistake, it is not going to be easy to flip Kadyn Proctor from Iowa. First and foremost, he is an Iowa guy. He's from the state, so playing for his home state school probably does mean something for him. Secondly, we know what Iowa does with offensive linemen. It is a factory for offensive linemen, especially sending them to the NFL. So getting in a five-star guy would be great for the Hawkeyes. And one thing we need to note is that Kadyn Proctor would be the highest-rated recruit in Iowa Hawkeyes history. But that being said, that's not stopping several of the top institutions from coming after Kadyn Proctor. Institutions such as the Oregon Ducks with Dan Lanning, Nick Saban and the Alabama Crimson Tide, and Coach Prime in Colorado. So we need to go through this list. We need to talk about the recruiting battle that's about to unfold right in front of our faces. We need to get acquainted to who these recruiters are going to be, and then we need to talk about the likelihood of a flip. And we're going to start with Oregon, somewhere where Kadyn Proctor has taken several visits to. Dan Lanning has a lot of hype around the Ducks, and look, deservedly so. Oregon's a beautiful campus. It's a cool football school, a lot of intrigue around the program, and they're coming off of a fairly successful year. Whenever you look, I think a lot of people instantly wrote the Ducks off whenever Georgia came in there and beat them handedly the first week of the season. That was a solid Oregon team, and it leaves me questioning and curious to what Dan Lanning's going to be able to do next. And certainly, he has his sights set on Kadyn Proctor, the five-star offensive tackle, and for good reason. But the offensive line coach at Oregon is someone I found notable, and that's Adrian Klemm. And Adrian Klemm was the former offensive line coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers before taking the job at Oregon with Dan Lanning. And if you're a recruit, having somebody that's sitting across from you giving you the pitch of you should come and play here is going to hit a little bit different whenever that guy was just coaching offensive linemen in the NFL. You're going to believe what he tells you when he says, I know what it takes to get you ready for the next level because I was just coaching those guys at the next level. Oregon is a major program in college football. They're coming off of an exciting season, and they have a really solid offensive line coach who can look at a five-star offensive tackle and say, hey, I know what it takes to get you ready for the next level. I was just there coaching those guys. That's going to be a really tough pitch to say no to. But if we're talking about hype around college football right now, well, there's no institution generating the hype that Coach Prime in Colorado are able to generate right now. And it is palpable. We've talked about the number before, but a few days after Coach Prime took the job at Colorado, over 200 prospects, both in recruiting and in the transfer portal, had already reached out to Colorado to gauge their interest, and they've set their sights on five-star offensive tackle Kadyn Proctor. And this is an area of big need for Colorado. The Colorado Buffaloes offensive line gave up 23 sacks last season, and Coach Prime and this staff knows if they want to have the season they think they could be building towards, there's no place they need to turn their attention to more than the trenches, the offensive line and the defensive line. Because I think Shedeur Sanders is a really, really talented quarterback. He was a four-star guy coming out of high school, a top 300 guy coming out of high school, and he threw for a ton of yards at Jackson State, did not turn the ball over, made good decisions, and had a 70% completion percentage. So I think he's going to translate. But the one thing you need to do is make sure you can keep him protected, keep him upright. The the offensive line is paramount. Now, I have no doubt that Coach Prime and offensive line coach Bill O'Boyle are going to address offensive line needs in the transfer portal, but if you could flip a 5-star offensive tackle, you don't argue with that, especially someone like Kadyn Proctor, who stands 6'7", 300 pounds and carries around 300 pounds like it's 250. This is a dude that looks destined for the NFL, and I have no doubt that Coach Prime would love getting him in. Now, this is going to be a bit of an uphill battle, in my opinion. Yes, Coach Prime is generating all of the hype in the world, but Bill O'Boyle is a new face on the Power 5 level. He was the offensive line coach under Sean Lewis at Kent State, and Sean Lewis and that Kent State offense, very, very effective. There is no questioning the effectiveness of that Sean Lewis offense. It's something I can't wait to see in Boulder, especially with that altitude, the pace they go. They're going to exhaust teams, and it's going to be really interesting to see. But because Bill O'Boyle doesn't have the cachet behind his name as an Adrian Clem, or even a Coach Eric Walford, who we'll get into, it's going to be interesting to see whether or not they can pull off this flip. And just to be perfectly clear here, even though O'Boyle may not have the notoriety to his name as a Coach Eric Walford or a Coach Adrian Clem, he is still a very, very solid coach. Do not get this misunderstood. He is a very good offensive line coach, and whatever notoriety he may lack, let's be perfectly transparent here. Coach Prime more than makes up for it. We've seen Coach Prime be a disruptor in the recruiting process for college football already, both at Colorado and especially last year what he did at Jackson State, where he pulled Travis Hunter and Kevin Coleman, who every institution in the nation was after. So whatever notoriety O'Boyle may lack, Coach Prime more than makes up for it, which makes this such an intriguing battle. Could Colorado get a major flip? And if they pull off this flip right here, guys, I think the college football as a whole will collectively gasp if they flip Kadyn Proctor. I'm not saying I think it's that unlikely. I'm just saying that would show how quickly Coach Prime is mobilizing. The last team we need to get into in relation to this battle is the Alabama Crimson Tide and Nick Saban and offensive line coach Eric Walford. And that's an offensive line coach that I was very happy that Alabama hired last offseason. Last year, Alabama's offensive line, it was bad. I don't think there's any way to sugarcoat it. Bryce Young won the Heisman while being one of the most pressured and sacked quarterbacks in the nation. Bryce Young threw for almost 5,000 yards while being a quarterback that did not have a clean pocket. And that was cleaned up a lot this season. Now, make no mistake, if you're an Alabama fan watching this video, you're probably sitting there thinking to yourself, well, our offensive line was still not great. And that is not my contention. There's still a lot of work to be done on this Alabama offensive line, but I do have to give credit where it's due. Coach Walford inherited an offensive line that was shaky at best, bad to be real, and that offensive line had just lost a top 10 draft pick in Evan Neal. So he had an offensive line that was shaky without one of the most talented players in all of college football on it, and still somehow had that offensive line yield better results. That's why I say I'm convinced on Eric Walford. I think he is a guy that is great for Alabama. He was great at Kentucky with their offensive line. You look at the statistical improvement that offensive line at Kentucky showed under the tenure of Coach Eric Walford. Very excited to see what he can do for Alabama. Now, interestingly enough for Alabama, Kadyn Proctor and Alabama, that's a relationship we've been watching for quite some time. Alabama has been after Proctor for a while, and they would love nothing more than to flip him. This class that Alabama's putting together, it looks special. And if they could top it off with a Kadyn Proctor, well, Nick Saban would be over the moon. And one thing we have to acknowledge, Alabama and Nick Saban, they have the ability to flip anybody in the nation. Alabama is one of those institutions where if you saw a 5-star guy flip on National Signing Day, and you asked your buddies, well, who'd he flip to? And they looked at you and said, well, he flipped to Alabama. You'd all sit there and go, of course. Of course he flipped to Alabama. Of course Nick Saban pulled that off. Because that's just kind of expected at this point, right? Alabama has had a chance at the number one recruiting class, if not outright the number one recruiting class, for as long as many of us can remember. I mean, it's been over a decade they've seemingly ran recruiting, so I don't think anybody would be inherently surprised if they flipped Kadyn Proctor, but it would still be a monumental flip, and one they're going to be pursuing heavily. They don't have Bryce Young next year. The quarterback position is one that's going to be a battle, and there are going to be some battles along that offensive line. What better way to shore it up than with who I have as the number one offensive tackle in a year I think is really solid for offensive linemen. And don't get it twisted. The battle between Francis Mauigoa and Kadyn Proctor is razor thin in my opinion. I just like Kadyn Proctor's film. I don't think you can go wrong with any of your big name guys in the offensive line category this recruiting cycle. I think it's a really loaded group. A lot of teams are going to be very happy, but that does not mean that they're not going to try and push to flip Kadyn Proctor. Hop down to the comments, let me know what you're thinking, because this is going to be a really fun battle that we have to watch. Oregon, Alabama, and Coach Prime in Colorado all doing everything they can to flip the talented 5-star. Hop down to the comments, let me know what you're thinking. That's it. See ya.